Hello. Welcome. I'm being a bit quieter today because it is a reading stream. I finally found a book which I wanted to read. Not the one which I originally wanted to read, but it's still a fun one. Welcome everyone. Grab a blanket. This is gonna be nice and comfy. Yeah. I wanted to get the digital version of this book, which is not the digital. Bleh. I'm already messing my words up. Very good start. I wanted to get a physical copy of the book, which I was gonna read, which is Oscar Wilde, The Canterville Ghost. But sadly, I'm not able to find an English version. So, if I need page-turning ASMR, I have a different book here, I don't know if you can hear it. I can just cheese it like that. I do have the digital version though. So the book I'm gonna read is The Canterville Ghost by Oscar Wilde. And if you know his work, this man is very gay. At least that's what I've read in one of his previous books. So who knows what the story will be about really, because this may be about a ghost, but who knows what kind of relationships will be in the book. His writing, however, is very fun to see, and it's also very old English, so I might struggle. But at the very least, compared to last time, I think my speaking and reading abilities have improved a little bit, so hopefully I won't be too much, I won't stumble too much over my words. Which I'm definitely not doing. That's a lie. It's completely a lie. Alright. Let's get into it. Let me grab the copy I have here. One moment. Oh, and by the way, I'm not gonna be reading chat so much, nor really saying much myself, aside from when I'm taking a break or in between chapters, because of course I'm reading a story. Story is the main focus. So yeah. There we go. Also, we're in a much nicer, warmer, comfier location compared to that last time. Last time, the place we were in was a bit more secluded, almost like I would have kidnapped you, but I swear that's not the case this time. However, the book itself will be more on the spooky side, so it's a nice contrast. Right. Here we go. The Canterville Ghost by Oscar Wilde. It is a short book, normally. I don't know how many chapters there were exactly, but if it is too short, we might read some poetry after. Who knows? Chapter 1. When Mr. Hiram B. Otis, the American minister, bought Canterville Chase, everyone told him he was doing a very foolish thing, as there was no doubt at all that the place was haunted. Indeed, Lord Canterville himself, who was a man of the most punctilious humour, felt it his duty to mention the fact to Mr. Otis when they came to discuss terms. "We have not cared to live in the place ourselves," said Lord Canterville, "since my grand aunt, the Dowager Duchess of Bolton, was frightened into a fit, from which she never really recovered, by 2 skeleton hands being placed on her shoulders as she was dressing for dinner. And I feel bound to tell you, Mr. Otis, that the ghost has been seen by several living members of my family, as well as by the rector of the parish, the Rev. Augustus Dampier, who is a fellow King's College, Cambridge. After the unfortunate accident to the Duchess, none of our younger servants would stay with us, and Lady Canterville often got very little sleep at night, in the consequence of the mysterious noises that came from the corridor and library. "My lord," answered the minister, "I will take the furniture and the ghost at a valuation. I come from a modern country where we have everything that money can buy, and with all our spry young fellows painting the old world red and carrying off our best actresses and prima donnas, I reckon that, if there were such a thing as a ghost in Europe, we'd have it at home in a very short time in one of our public museums, or on the road as a show." "I fear that the ghost exists," said Lord Canterville, smiling, "though it may have resisted the overtures of your enterprising impersonator." Old English. "It has been well known for 3 centuries, since 1584, 48, in fact, and always makes its appearance before the death of any member of our family." "Well, so does the family doctor, for that matter, Lord Canterville, but there is no such thing, sir, as a ghost. I guess the laws of nature are not going to be suspended for the British aristocracy." You are certainly very natural in America," answered Lord Canterville, who did not quite understand Mr. Otis's last observation. "And if you don't mind a ghost in the house, it is all right. Only you must remember, I warned you." A few weeks after this, the purchase was completed, and at the close of this season, the minister and his family went down to the Canterville Chase. Mrs. Otis, who, as Miss Victoria R. Tappan of West 53rd Street, had been celebrated New York belle, was now a very handsome middle-aged woman with fine eyes and a superb profile. Many American ladies, on leaving their native land, adopt an appearance of chronic ill health under the impression that it is a form of European refinement. But Mrs. Otis has never fallen to this error. She had a magnificent constitution and a really wonderful amount of animal spirits. Indeed, in many respects, she was quite English, and was an excellent example of the fact that we have everything in common with America nowadays, except, of course, the language. Her eldest son, christened Washington by his parents in a moment of patriotism which he never ceased to regret, was a fair-haired, rather good-looking young man who had qualified himself for the American diplomacy, leading the German at Newport Casino for 3 consecutive seasons, and even in London was well known as an excellent dancer. Gardenias and the peerage were only his weakness. Otherwise, he was extremely sensible. Miss Virginia E. Otis was a little girl of 15, lithe and lovely as a fawn, and with a fine freedom in her large blue eyes. She was a wonderful Amazon, and had once waylaid old Lord Bilton, her pony, twice around the park, winning by a length and a half, just in front of the Achilles statue, to the huge delight of the young Duke of Cheshire, who proposed for her on the spot, and was then sent back to Eton that very night by his guardians, in floods of tears. After Virginia came the twins, who were usually called the Stars and Stripes, as they were always getting wished. They were delightful boys, and with the exception of the worthy minister, the only true Republicans of the family. As Canterville Chase is 7 miles from Ascot, the nearest railway station, Mr. Alford had telegraphed for a wagonette to meet them, and they started their drive in high spirits. It was a lovely July evening, and the air was delicate with the scent of pine woods. Now and then he had heard a wood pigeon brooding over its own sweet voice, or saw, in a deep rustling fern, the burnished the burnished breast of the pheasant. Little squirrels peered at them from the birch trees as they went by, and the rabbits scuttered away through the bushwood and over the mossy knolls, their white tails in the air. As they entered the avenue of Canterville Chase, however, the sky became suddenly overcast with clouds. A curious stillness seemed to hold the atmosphere. A great flight of rooks passed over their silent heads. Blech. One moment. One second. One water break. I know it's early, but I'm stumbling. A great flight of rooks passed silently over their heads, and before they reached the house, some big drops of rain had fallen. Standing on the steps to receive them was an old woman, neatly dressed in black silk, with a white cap and apron. This was Mrs. Umney, the housekeeper, whom Mrs. Otis, at Lady Canterville's earnest request, had consented to keep in her former position. She made them each a low courtesy as they alighted, and said a quaint, old-fashioned manner, "I bid you welcome to the Canterville Chase." Following her, they passed through the fine Tower Hall into the library, a long, low room panelled in black oak. At the end was a large stained glass window. Here they had found tea laid out for them, and after taking off their wraps, they sat down and began to look around, while Mrs. Umney was waiting on them. Suddenly, Mrs. Otis had a slight dull of a red stain. Blech. Caught a red I'm trying. Suddenly, Mrs. Otis caught sight of a dull red stain on the floor just by the fireplace, and, quite unconscious of what it really signified, said to Mrs. Umney, "I'm afraid something has been spilt here." "Yes, madam," replied the old housekeeper in a low voice. "Blood has been spilled on that exact spot." "How horrid!" cried Mrs. Otis. "I don't at all care for bloodstains in a sitting room. It must be removed at once." The old woman smiled and answered in the same low, mysterious voice, "It is the blood of Lady Eleanor de Canterville, who was murdered on that exact spot by her own husband, Sir Simon de Canterville, in 1575. Sir Simon survived her 9 years and disappeared suddenly under very mysterious circumstances. His body had never been discovered, but his guilty spirit still haunts the chase. The bloodstain has been much admired by tourists and others, and thus cannot be removed." That is nonsense, cried Washington Otis. Pinkerton's champion stain remover, and the Pericone detergent will clean it up in no time. And before the terrified housekeeper could interfere, he had fallen upon his knees and was rapidly scorching the floor with a small stick of what looked like a black cosmetic. In a few moments, no trace of the bloodstain could be seen. Only mildly sussy. I knew Pinkerton could do it. That's a guy I was voicing. Hold on. I knew Pinkerton could do it, he exclaimed triumphantly as he looked around at his family, admiring. But no sooner had he said these words than a terrible flash of lightning lit up the somber room. A fearful peal of thunder made them all startled to their feet, and Mrs. Umney fainted. What a monstrous climate, said the American minister calmly, as he lit a long cheroot. I guess the old country is so overpopulated that they have not done enough weather. They don't have enough weather. God, English books, old English books. I didn't know it was this hard. It is good practice though. I guess the old country is so overpopulated that they have not enough decent weather for everybody. I have always been of opinion that immigration is the only thing for England. My dear Hiram, cried Mrs. Otis, what can we do with a woman who faints? Charge it to her like breakages, answered the minister. She won't faint after that. And in a few moments, Mrs. Umney certainly came to. There was no doubt, however, that she was extremely upset. She sternly warned Mr. Otis to beware of some trouble coming to the house. I've seen things with my own eyes, sir, she said. It would make any Christian's hair stand on end. And many, many a night I have not closed my eyes in sleep for the awful things that are done here. Mr. Otis, however, and his wife warmly assured the honest soul that they were not afraid of ghosts, and after invoking the blessings of Providence in her new master and mistress, and making arrangement for an increase of salary, the old housekeeper trotted off to her own room. That is chapter 1. See, the chapters are fairly short. So far, something sussy has been going, and I saw your sus little message, Robin. Old English books are kind of weird to read, but you still get what is happening, for the most part, at the very least. Something sussy is going on. They're saying they're not afraid of ghosts, but we'll see what happens. I'll drink just a little bit more. Chapter 2. The storm raged fiercely all that night, but nothing of particular to note had occurred. The next morning, however, when he came down to breakfast, he had found a terrible stain of blood once again on the floor. I don't think it can be the fault of the parent detergent, said Washington, for I have tried it with everything. It must be the ghost, he said accordingly, rubbing the stain out a second time. But the second morning, it appeared again. The third morning, it was also there. Though the library had been locked up at night by Mrs. Otis himself. Oh, so it is a him. Whoops. Ooh. Oh, Jesus. And the key had been carried upstairs. The whole family were now quite interested. Mr. Otis began to suspect that he had been too dogmatic in his denial of existence of ghosts. Mrs. Otis' expression... Mr. Otis expressed her intention of joining the Psychical Society, and Washington prepared for a long letter to Messrs. Myers and Podmore on the subject of the permanence of sanctuous saints are connected with crime. That night, all doubts about the objective existence of phantasmia were removed forever. That day had been a warm and sunny, and in the cool of the evening, the whole family went out for a drive. They did not return home until 9 o'clock, when they had a light supper. The conversation in no way turned upon ghosts, so there were not even those primary conditions of receptive expectations which so often precede in the presentation of psychical phenomena. The subject discussed, as I have since learned from Mr. Otis, were merely such as the ordinary conversational culture, Americans of the better class, such as the immense superiority of Miss Fanny Davenport over Sarah Bernhardt as an actress, the difficulty of obtaining green corn, buckwheat cakes, and himony, even in the best English houses, the importance of Boston in the development of world souls, the advantages of the baggage checks in the railway traveling, and the sweetness of the New York accent as compared to the London drawl. No mention at all was made of the supernatural, nor was Sir Simon de Canterville alluded to in any way. At 11 o'clock the family retired, and by 5:30 the lights were out. Some time after Mr. Otis was awakened by a noise in the corridor outside his room. It sounded like a clank of metal, and seemed to be coming over nearer every moment. He got up at once, struck a match, and looked at the time. It was exactly 9 o'clock. He was quite calm and felt his pulse, which was not at all feverish. The strange noise still continued, and with it he heard distinctly the sound of footsteps. He put on his slippers, took a small oblong phial out of his dressing case, and opened the door. Right in front of him he saw, in the wan moonlight, an old man of terrible aspect. His eyes were as red as burning coals. Long grey hair fell over his shoulders in matted coils. His garments, which were of antique cut, were soiled and ragged, and from his wrists and ankles hung heavy manacles and rusty chives. "My dear sir," said Mr. Otis, "I really must insist on your oiling those chains, and have brought for you that purpose a small bottle of Tamanani, rising some lubricant. It is said to be completely efficacious upon one application. There are several testimonials to that effect of the wrapper from some of our most eminent native divines. I shall leave it here for you by the bedroom candles. I will be happy to supply you with more should you require it. With these words, the United States minister laid the bottle down on the marble table, closing his door and retired to rest. For a moment, the Canterville ghost stood quite motionless in natural indignation. Then, dashing the bottle violently upon the polishing floor, he fled down the corridor, uttering hollowed groans and emitting a ghastly green light. Just, however, as he reached the top of the great oak staircase, the door was flung open. Two white-robed figures appeared, and a large pillow whizzed past his head. There was evidently no time to be lost, so hastily adopting the fourth dimension of space as a means to escape. He vanished through the wainscoting, and the house became quite quiet. On reaching a small secret chamber on the left wing, he leaned up against a moonbeam to recover his breath, and began to try and realize his position. Never, in a brilliant and uttered career of 300 years, had he been so grossly insulted. He thought of the Dockwater Duchess, whom he had frightened into a fit as she stood before the glass in her lace and diamonds, of the 4 housemaids, who had gone off into hysterics when he merely grinned at them through the curtains of one of the spare bedrooms, of the rector of the parish, whose candle he had blown out as he was coming late from the library one night, and who had been under the care of Sir William Gull ever since. A perfect martyr to nervous disorders. And of old Madame de Tilmac, who, having wakened upon a morning early and seen a skeleton-seated arm lit by a fire chair while reading her diary, had been confined in her bed for 6 weeks with an attack of brain fever, and on her recovery had become reconciled to the church and broken off her connection with that notorious skeptic Monsieur de Voltaire. He remembered the terrible night when the wicked Lord Canterville was found choking in his dressing room, with the knave of diamonds halfway down his throat, and confessed just before he died that he had cheated Charles James Fox out of £50,000 at Coxfield by means of that very card, and that swore that the ghost had made him swallow it. All his great achievements came back to him again. From the butler who had shot himself in the pantry because he had seen a green hand tapping on the window pane, to the beautiful Lady Stutfield, who was always obliged to wear a black velvet band around her throat to hide the mark of 5 fingers burnt upon her white skin, and who drowned herself in the last carp pond at the end of King's Walk. With the enthusiastic egotism of the true artist, he went over to his most celebrated performances and smiled bitterly to himself as he recalled to mind his last appearance as Red Reuben or the Strangled Babe, his debut as Gaunt Gibeon, the bloodsucker of Bellix Moor, and the furore he had excited one lovely June evening by merely playing ninepins with his own bones upon the lawn tennis ground. And after all this, some wretched modern Americans were to come in and offer him the Rising Sun lubricant and throw pillows at his head. It was quite unbearable. Besides, No ghost in history had ever been treated in that manner. Accordingly, he determined to have vengeance, and remained till daylight in an attitude of deep thought. It's the end of chapter 2. So far not what I expected. The ghost is now a character of his own. Very soon already. Almost like a real person. I mean, it is a real person, technically just dead. Ooh. Bit of a stretch. We're 5 pages in of the 19 pages total. Alright. So far, if you have any thoughts about the book or any speculations of what might be going on or what might happen in the future, go for it. Stretching my throat a little. Reading is a whole different experience than just talking, definitely. Okay. Whoa. Okay. Now we're gonna move on to chapter 3. The next morning, when the Otis family met at breakfast, they discussed the ghost at some length. Oh, sorry. Oh, jeez. I drank a little too fast. Oh! Burps. No. I'm fine. The United States minister was naturally a little annoyed to find that his present had not been accepted. "I have no wish," he said, "to do the ghost any personal injury, and I must say that considering the length of time he has been in the house, I don't think it is at all polite to throw pillows at him." A very just remark, at which I am sorry to say the twins burst into such shouts of laughter. "Upon the other hand," he continued, "if he really declines to use the Rising Sun lubricant, we shall have to take his chains from him. It would be quite impossible to sleep with such a noise going outside the bedrooms." For the rest of the week, however, they were undisturbed. The only thing that excited any attention being the continual renewal of bloodstain on the raspberry floor. This certainly was very strange, as the door was always locked at night. Wait a moment. I feel like... okay, no. I thought I read this already. Wait. Okay, no, it's good. It's fine. Is it? Hold on. Yeah, okay. Never mind. I thought it repeated for a second. I thought I hadn't turned the page. They kept the windows closely barred. The chameleon-like color. Also, the stain excited a good deal of comment. Some mornings it was a dull, almost Indian red. Then it would be vermilion. Then a rich purple. Then once, when I came down for family prayers, according to the simple rites of the Free American Reformed Episcopalian Church, they found it a bright emerald green. These kaleidoscopic changes naturally amused the party very much, and their bets on the subject were freely made every evening. The only person who did not enter into the joke was little Virginia, who was, for some unexplained reason, always a good deal distressed at the sight of the bloodstain, and very nearly cried the morning it was emerald green. The second appearance of the ghost was on Sunday night, shortly after they had gone to bed. They were suddenly alarmed by a fearful crash in the hall. Rushing downstairs, they had found that a large suit of armor had become detached from his stand and fallen on the stone floor. While seated in a high-backed chair was the Canterville ghost, rubbing his knees with an expression of acute agony on his face. The twins, having brought their pea shooters with them, at once discharged 2 pellets on him, with the accuracy of aim which can only be attained by long and careful practice on a riding master. While the United States minister covered him with his revolver and called upon him, in accordance with Californian etiquette, to hold up his hands. The ghost started up with a wild shriek of rage and swept through them like a mist, extinguishing Washington's Alton's candle as he passed, and leaving them all in total darkness. On reaching the top of the staircase, he recovered himself and determined to give his celebrated peal of a demonic laugh. This had he on more than one occasion found extremely useful. I was said to have turned Lord Racqueur's wig grey in a single night, and had certainly made 3 of Lady Canterville's French governors give a warning before their month was up. He accordingly laughed his most horrible laugh till the old vaulted roof rang and rang again, but hardly had the fearful echo died away when a door opened and Mrs. Otis came out in a light blue dressing gown. "I am afraid you are far from well," she said, "and have brought to you a bottle of Dr. Obleas tincture. If it is indigestion, you'll find it a most excellent remedy." The ghost glared at her in fury and began at once to make preparations for turning himself into a large black dog, an accomplishment for which he was justly renowned, and to which the family doctor was always attributed to permanent idiocy of Lord Canterville's uncle, the hum Thomas Horton. The sound of approaching footsteps, however, made him hesitate in his fell purpose, so he contented himself with becoming faintly— I don't know how to say that word. Hold on 1 second. I have Google on my side. Hello. One moment. Trying to say this the best I can. Okay. Switch. Phosphorescent. Oh, that's a new word. Becoming— okay. Starting again. The sound of approaching footsteps, however, made him hesitate in his fell purpose, so he contented himself with becoming faintly phosphorescent, and vanished with a deep, churchyard groan, just as the twins had come up to him. On reaching his room, he entirely broke down, and became a prey to the most violent agitation. The vulgarity of the twins and the gross materialism of Mrs. Otis were naturally extremely annoying, but what really distressed him most was that he had been unable to wear the suit of the male. He had hoped that even modern Americans would be thrilled by the sight of a spectre in armor, if no more for a sensible reason, at least out of respect for the natural poet Longfellow, over whose graceful and attractive poetry he himself had whined many weary hours when the Cantervilles were up in town. Besides, it was his own suit. He had worn it with great success at the Kenilworth tournament, and had been highly complimented on it by no less a person than the Virgin Queen herself. Yet, when he had put it on, he had been completely overpowered by the weight of the huge breastplate and steel casque, and had fallen heavily on the stone pavement, barking both his knees severely and bruising the knuckles of his right hand. For some days after this, he was extremely ill, and hardly stirred out of his room at all, except to keep the bloodstain properly in repair. However, by taking great care of himself, he recovered and resolved to make a third attempt at frightening the United States minister and his family. Ooh, the ghost is gonna pull a spooky. I see that sussy, it is very sussy. I'm kind of EP today, but I think that's good for story reading, so I don't go too loud. He selected Friday, the 17th of August, for his appearance, and spent most of that day looking over his wardrobe, ultimately deciding in favor of a large slouched hat with a red feather, a winding sheet filled at the wrists and neck, and a rusty dagger. Towards the evening, a violent storm came on, and the wind was so high the windows and doors in the old house shook and rattled. In fact, it was such weather that he loved. His plan of action was this. He was to make his way quietly to Washington Oakthison's room, gibber at him from the foot of the bed, and stab himself 3 times in the throat to the sound of slow music. He bore Washington's special grudge, being quite aware that it was he who was in the habit of removing the famous Canterville bloodstain by means of Pinkerton the Madeline's detergent. Ooh. Oh dear. No! Ah! It's interrupting my reading, no! Having reduced the recklessness and foolhardy youth to a condition of abject horror, he was then to proceed to the room occupied by the United States minister and his wife. There was a place for a There was to place a clammy hand on Mrs. Otis's forehead, while he hissed into her trembling husband's ear the awful secrets of the Cornell house. With regard to little Virginia, he had not quite made up his mind. She had never insulted him in any way, and was pretty and gentle. A few hollow groans from the wardrobe, he thought, would be more than sufficient. Or, if that failed to wake her, he might grapple at the counterpane with the pulse twitchy fingers. As for the twins, he was quite determined to teach them a lesson. The first thing to be done was, of course, to sit upon their chests so as to produce the stifling sensation of nightmare. Then, as their beds were quite close to each other, to stand between them in the form of a green, icy, cold corpse till they became paralyzed with fear, and finally to throw off the winding shield and crawl around the room with white bleached bones and one rolling eyeball, and the character of Dumb Daniel, or Suicide Skeleton, a role in which he had been in more than one occasion, which produced a great effect, and which he considered quite equal to his famous part of Martin and the Maniac, or The Masked Mystery. At 10:30, he heard the family going to bed. For some time, he was disturbed by the shrieks of wild laughter from the twins, who, with the light-hearted gaiety of schoolboys, were evidently amusing themselves before they retired to rest. But at 11:15, all was still, and at midnight sounded, he sallied forth. The owl beat against the window panes. The raven croaked from the old yew tree, and the wind wandered moaning around the house like a lost soul. But the Otis family slept unconscious of their doom, and high above the rainstorm they could hear the steady snoring of the Minister of the United States. He stepped stealthily out of the wainscoting with an evil smile on his cruel, wrinkled mouth, and the moon hid her face in a cloud as he stole past the great oriel window, where his own arms and those of his murdered wife were emblazoned in azure and gold. On and on he glided, like an evil shadow, the very darkness seeming to loathe him as he passed. He once thought he heard something call, and stopped. But it was only the baying of a dog from the Red Farm, and he went on, muttering strange 16th century curses, and ever and on brandishing the rusty dagger in the midnight air. Finally, he reached the corner of the passage that led to Lucky's Washington's room. For a moment he paused there, the wind blowing his long grey locks about his head and twisting into grotesque and fantastic folds the nameless horror of the dead man's shroud. Then the clock struck at the quarter, and he felt time was to come. He chuckled to himself and turned the corner, but no sooner had he done so than with piteous wail of terror he fell back, and hid his Blanche's face in his long bony hands. Right in front of him was standing a horrible spectre, motionless as the carven image, and monstrous as a madman's dream. Its head was bald and burnished, its face was round and flat and white, and hideous laughter seemed to have writhed its features into an eternal grin. From the eyes steamed rays, the red scarlet light, the mouth was a wide well on fire, and the hideous garment, like to his own, swathed with silent snows the Titan form. On its breast was a placard with a strange writing antique characters. Some scroll of shame, it seemed. Some record of wild sins. Some awful calendar of crime. With its right hand, it bore aloft a falchion of gleaming steel. Never having seen a ghost before, he was naturally terribly frightened, and, after a second hasty glance at the Alpha Phantom, he fled back to his room, tripping up his long winding sheet as he sped down the corridor, and finally dropped the rusty dagger into the minister's jack boots, where it was found in the morning by the butler. Once, in the privacy of his own apartment, he flung himself down on a small pallet bed and hid his face under the clothes. After a time, however, the brave old Canterville spirit asserted itself, and he determined to go back and speak to the other ghost as soon as it was daylight. Accordingly, just as the dawn was touching the hills with silver, he returned towards the spot where he had laid eyes on the grisly phantom, feeling that, after all, 2 ghosts were better than 1, and at that, by the aid of his new friend, he might safely grapple with the twins. On reaching the spot, however, a terrible sight met his gaze. Something had evidently happened to the spectre, for the light had entirely faded from its hollow eyes. The gleaming falchion had fallen from his hand, and it was leaning up against the wall in a strained and uncomfortable attitude. He rushed forward and seized it in his arms, when to his horror, it had slipped off and rolled onto the floor. The body assumed a recumbent position and found himself clasping a white, dingy bed curtain with a sweeping brush, a kitchen cleaver, and a hollow turnip lying at its feet. Unable to understand this curious transformation, he clutched the pallet with feverish haste, and there, in the grey morning light, he read these fearful words: "Ye old ghosty, ye only true, and originally spook, beware of ye imitations, all others are counterfeit." The whole thing flashed across him. He had been tricked, foiled, and outwitted. The old Canterville ghost got a look in his eyes. He ground his toothless gums together, and bracing his withered hands high above his head, swore, according to the picturesque there's the word again, phraseology in the antique school, that where Chancelier had sounded twice his merry horn, deeds of blood would be wrought, and murder walk abroad his silent feet. Hardly had he finished this awful oath, when from the red-tiled roof, a distant homestead, a corkscrew. He laughed, a long, low, bitter laugh, and waited. Hour after hour he waited, but the cock, for some strange reason, did not crow again. Finally, at 7:30, the arrival of the housemaids made him give up on his fearful vigil, and he stalked back to his room, thinking of his vain hope and baffled of purpose. Here he consulted several books of ancient chivalry, of which he was exceedingly fond, and found that on every occasion on which his oath had been used, Chanticleer had always crowed a second time. Tradition sees the naughty fowl, he muttered. I have seen the day when my sprout spear I would have run him through the gorge and made him crow for me. Tweer in death, and then he retired to a comfortable reed coffin and stayed there till evening. That's the end of that chapter. Wow. It's more exhausting on the throat than I thought. Also, the amount of words that I don't know in this story is amazing, but I'm learning. I think next time, if I'm gonna read literature, I might not go for Old English. But it is still a fun read. I gotta master modern English reading first. What do you think so far? Because for me, like, some parts are kind of hard to understand just because it's so old English. But like the ghost has become the main character in the story, which I didn't expect. And he met a little buddy who was not an actual ghost. The family had tricked him. I kind of want to see the ghost succeed now, even though he's literally murdered people. Stick it up to Oscar Wilde to make you root for the weirdest characters. Oh. No, when I was looking for his story actually, or at least some of his stories, I found a play which was more comedy-ish. If honestly, if I had the memory to memorize a play and someone to play it with, I would do it 100%. I think that would be really fun. And again, memorization and all of the characters, plus it being old English, ooh, hard to do. Oh. Big stretch. I've been going for an hour already, but... Okay, so it is a short story, but there are still 10 pages left. You think we're gonna make this past another hour? Oh, sorry. Oh Jesus, I'm drinking water. Right. There's 10 pages left, which is probably a little over an hour. Which is actually kind of perfect for me. I'm just hoping my throat is gonna hold up. Oh. Okay. Wait, hold on. Which chapter were we on? Just scrolling back a little bit. Because that was a long chapter. Okay, we're on chapter 4 now. Page 9, chapter 4. There we go. Okay, give me 1 second. Because I feel a sneeze coming. I'm gonna... Okay, I think I'm good. Whoa. Ah. I swear, I am awake. Alright, chapter 4. The next day, the ghost was very weak and tired. Terrible excitement from the last 4 weeks was beginning to have its effects. His nerves were completely shattered, and he started at the slightest noise. For 5 days he kept his room, and at last made up its mind to give up the point of the bloodstain on the library floor. If the Otis family did not want it, they clearly did not deserve it. They were evidently people on a low material plane of existence, and quite incapable of appreciating symbolic values of the sensuous phenomena. The question of the phasmic apparitions and the development of astral bodies was, of course, quite a different matter, and did not and really didn't and really not under his control. It was his solemn duty to appear in the corridor once a week and not to gibber from the large oriel window on the first third Wednesday every month. And he did not see how he could honorably escape from his obligations. It's quite true that his life had been very evil, but upon the other hand, he was most conscious with all the things connected and the supernatural. For the next 3 Saturdays, accordingly, he traversed the corridor as per usual between midnight and 3 o'clock, taking every possible precaution against being either heard or seen. He removed his boots, trod as lightly as possible on the old worm-eaten boards, wore a large black velvet cloak, and was careful to use the rising sun lubricant for his chains. I am bound to acknowledge that it was with a good deal of difficulty that he had brought himself to adopt this last mode of protection. However, one night, while the family were at dinner, he slipped into Mr. Otis's bedroom and carried off the bottle. He felt a little humiliated at first, but afterwards was sensible enough to see there was a great deal to be said for the invention, and to a certain degree served its purpose. Still, in spite of everything, he was not left unmolested. Strings were continuously being stretched across the corridor, over which he tripped in the dark, and on one occasion, while he dressed for the part of Black Isaac in the Huntsman of Hollywoods, he was met with a severe fall through treading on a butter slide, which the twins had constructed from the entrance of the tapestry chamber on top of the oak staircase. This last insult so enraged him that he resolved to make one final effort to assert his dignity and social position, and determined to visit the insolent young annoyance the next night in the celebrated character of Reckless Rupert, or the Headless Earl. He had not appeared in this disguise for more than 70 years. In fact, not since he had so frightened pretty Lady Barbara Modish by means of it, that she suddenly broke off her engagement with the present Lord Canterville's grandfather and ran away to Greta Green with Handsome Jack, declaring that nothing in the world would induce her to marry into a family that allowed such a horrible phantom to walk up and down the terrace at twilight. Poor Jack was afterwards shot in a duel by Lord Canterville on Watchfield Common, and Lady Barbara died of a broken heart at Tunbridge Wells before the year was out. So, in every way, it had been a great success. It was, however, an extremely difficult make-up, if I may use such a theatrical expression in connection with the greatest mysteries of the supernatural, or, to employ a more scientific term, the higher natural world. It took him 3 full hours to make his preparations. At last, everything was ready, and he was very pleased with his appearance. The big leather riding boots that went with the dress were just a little too large for him, and he could only find one of the 2 horse pistols. But, on the whole, he was quite satisfied. And at the 1:15 past he glided to the wainscoting and crept down the corridor. On reaching the room occupied by the twins, which I should mention was called the Blue Bed Chamber on account of the color of its hangings, he had found the door just ajar. Wishing to make an effective entrance, he flung it wide open, and when a heavy jug of water fell right down on top of him, wetting him to the skin, and just missing his left shoulder by a couple of inches. At the same time, he heard stifled shrieks of laughter and proceeding coming from the four-post bed. The shock to his nervous system was so great that he fled back to his room as hard he could, and the next day he was laid up with a severe cold. The only thing at all that consoled him was the whole affair was the fact that he had not brought his head with him, for he had done so, the consequences might have been very serious. He now gave up all hope of ever frightening this brute American family, and contented himself, as a rule, with creeping out the passages in list slippers, with a thick red muffler, his throat for fear of draughts, and a small another word I can't read. Arquebus? I think it's arquebus. In case should he be attacked by the twins. The final blow he received occurred on the 19th of December. He had gone downstairs to the great entrance hall, feeling sure that there at any rate he could be quite unmolested, and was amusing himself with making satirical remarks on the large ceremony photographs of the United States minister and his wife, which had now taken place of the Canterville's family pictures. He was simply put with a neatly clad in long shroud, spotted with a church-laid mould, had tied up his jaw with a strip of yellow linen, and carried a small lantern and a sexton's spade. In fact, he was dressed for the character of Jonas the Graveless, or the corpse snatcher of Chesty Barn, one of his most remarkable impersonations, and one which the Cantervilles had every reason to remember. It was the origin of their quarrel with their neighbour, Lord Rufford. It was about 2:15 in the morning, and as far as he could discern, no one was stirring. As he was strolling towards the library, however, to see if there were any traces left of bloodstain, suddenly, there leaped out on him from the dark corner 2 figures, who waved their arms wildly above their heads and shrieked out "Boo!" in their ear. Seized with a panic, which under the circumstances was only natural, he rushed for the staircase, but found Washington's Otis waiting for him there, the big garden syringe, and being thus hemmed by his enemies on every side and driven to almost bay, he vanished into the great iron stove, which, fortunately for him, was not lit, and had to make his way home through the flues and chimney, arriving at his own room in a terrible state of dirt, disorder, and despair. After this, he was not seen again on any nocturnal expedition. The twins lay in wait for him for several occasions, and sewed the passages with nutshells every night, to the great annoyance of their parents and the servants, but it was to no avail. It was quite evident that his feelings were so wounded that he did not appear. Mr. Otis consequently resumed his great work on the history of the Democratic Party, on which he had been engaged for some years. Mrs. Otis organized a wonderful clam bake, which was amazed by the whole country. The boys took to lacrosse, euchre, poker, and other American national games, and Virginia rode about the lanes on her pony. Accompanied by the young Duke of Cheshire, who had come to spend the last week of his holidays at Canterville Chase. It was generally assumed that the ghost had gone away, and in fact, Mr. Otis wrote a letter at the effect to Lord Canterville, who replied in express of great pleasure at the news, and sent his best congratulations to the minister's worthy wife. The Ottises, however, were deceived, for the ghost was still in the house, and though now mostly an invalid, was by no means ready to let matters rest, particularly as he heard that among the guests was the young Duke of Cheshire, whose grand-uncle, Lord Farches Stilton, had once bet 100 guineas with the Colonel Carberry that he would play dice with the Canterville ghost, and was found the next morning lying on the floor of the card room in such a helpless, paralyzed state that, though he lived on to such a great age, he was never able to say anything again but double sixes. The story was as well known at the time, though, of course, out of respect for the feelings of the two noble families, every attempt was made to hush it up. Ooh. And the full amount of all the circumstances connected with it will be found in a third volume of Lord Tattle's collections of Prince Regent and his friends. The ghost, then, was naturally very anxious to show that he had not lost his influence over the Stiltons, with whom, indeed, he was distantly connected, his own first cousin having been married and second notches to the Sieur de Bulkeley, from whom, as everyone knows, the Duchess of Cheshire are lineally descended. Accordingly, he made arrangement for appearing to Virginia's little lover in celebration of impersonation of the vampire monk, or the bloodless Benedictine. I'm slightly struggling. A performance so horrible that when Lady Startup saw it, which she did on one fatal New Year's Eve in the year 1764, she went off into the most piercing shrieks, which culminated violently and died in 3 days. After disinheriting the Cantervilles, who were her nearest relations, and leaving all her money to London apothecary. At the last moment, however, his terror of the twins preventing his leaving his room, and the little Duke slept under the great feathered canopy in the royal bedchamber and dreamed of Virginia. It's another chapter done. My throat, I can't feel it anymore. I think I need to take a little bit more water breaks. Whoa. Oh wow, 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 wow. Oh. Trying to think. What do y'all again? Water break. So far, the ghost is being extremely disrespected. I kind of find it funny. I didn't expect this to be like slightly on the comedic side of things. I thought it would be spooky, but no, it's about a family. Well, so far, it's about a family who bought a house, knew there was a ghost in there, didn't believe in ghosts, or aren't scared of ghosts, and the ghost who is in there had a job of killing people, scaring people, and now he's just like, I can't scare these people, away, away. I'm being disrespected. And the twins are being like, seethe, molt, cry about it. I do find that funny. Ooh. I'm curious how the story is gonna continue. Is someone gonna end up dead? Is it just gonna be comedy? Who knows? I mean, people have died, but not in this family. Whoa. Well, I'm probably, like, once I'm done reading this, I'm probably gonna go back to bed. I am very eaten up today. I hardly slept, but I still wanted to do this. I was actually writing a story of my own before I went to streaming. Oh. Which is like, the story I'm writing is actually for the channel here, so maybe once I finished it, you'll see it. It's gonna be a fun story, I think. I'm giving myself a little bit more of a break before I continue. Because I know my voice is not gonna like me just burning through chapters. Right. We're now on chapter 5. I'm gonna drink a little bit more. Right. A few days after this, Virginia and her curly-haired cavalier went out riding on a bockly meadows, where she tore her habit so badly in getting through the hedge that on her return home she made up her mind to go back to the staircase, as so to not be seen. As she was running past the tapestry chamber, the door of which happened to be open, she fancied she saw someone inside, and thinking it was her mother's maid, who sometimes used to bring her work in there, looked in to ask to mend her habit. To her immense suspense, however, it was the Canterville ghost himself. He was sitting by the window, watching the ruined gold of the yellowing trees fly through the air, and the red leaves dancing madly down the long avenue. His head was leaning on his hand, and his whole attitude was one of extreme depression. Indeed, so forlorn and so much out of repair did he look, that little Virginia, whose first idea had been to run away and lock herself in a room, was filled with pity and determination to try and comfort him. So light was her footfall, and so deep his melancholy, that he was not aware of her presence till she spoke to him. "I'm so sorry for you," she said, "but my brothers are going back to Eton tomorrow, and then, if you behave yourself, no one will annoy you." "It is absurd asking me to behave," he answered, looking round in astonishment at the pretty little girl who had ventured to address him. "Quite absurd. I must rattle my chains and groan through keyholes and walk about at night, if that is what you mean. It is my only reason for existing." "It is no reason at all for existing. And you know, you have been very wicked. Mrs. Umney told us the first day we arrived here that you had killed your wife." "Well, I quite admit it," said the ghost peculantly, "but it was purely a family matter, and no one else's concern." "It is very wrong to kill anyone," said Virginia, who at times had a sweet, pungent gravity card from some old English ancestor. Oh, I hate the cheap severity of abstract ethics. My voice was very plain, never had my ruffs properly starched, and never knew nothing about cookery. Why, there was a buck I had shot in Hogley Woods, a magnificent pricket, and now, you know, how she was sent it up to the table. However, it is no matter for now, for it is all over. And I don't think it was very nice of her brothers to starve me to death, though I did kill her. Starve you to death? Oh, Mrs. Ghost, I mean, Sir Simon, are you hungry? I have my sandwich case. Would you like it? No, thank you. I never eat anything now, but it is very kind of you. All the same, and you are much nicer than the rest of your horrid, rude, vulgar, and dishonest family. Stop! Cried Virginia, stamping her foot. It is you who are rude, and horrid, and vulgar. As for dishonesty, you know you stole the paints out of my box and tried to furbish up that ridiculous bloodstain in the library. First you took all my rents, including the vermilion, and I couldn't do any more sunsets. Then you took the emerald green and the chrome yellow. And finally, I had nothing left but indigo Chinese white. And I could only do moonlight scenes, which are always depressing to look at. And not very at all easy to paint. I never told on you though. I was very much annoyed. And it was most ridiculous, the whole thing. For who had ever heard of emerald green blood? Well, really, said the ghost rather meekly. What was I to do? It is a very difficult thing to get a real blood nowadays. And as your brother began it all with his penchant detergent, I certainly saw no reason why it should not have your paints. As for color, that is always a matter of taste. The Cantervilles have blue blood, for instance. The very bluest in England, but I know you Americans don't care much for these kinds of things. Ooh. I don't know who's talking. You know nothing about it, and the best thing you can do is to emigrate and improve your mind. Wait, hold on. That is the girl. Is that the girl? I don't know who's speaking. Yeah. You know nothing about it, and the best thing you can do is emigrate and improve your mind. My father will only be happy to give you a free passage, and though there is a heavy duty on spirits of every kind, there will be no difficulty about house customs, and the officers are all Democrats. Once in New York, you are sure to be a great success. I know lots of people there who would give $100,000 to have a grandfather, and much more than that to have a family ghost. I don't think I should like America. I suppose because we have no ruins and curiosities, said Virginia sarcastically. No ruins and courtesies, answered the ghost. Have you and your navy your manners? Good evening. I will go and ask Papa to get the twins an extra week's holiday. Please don't go, Miss Virginia, he cried. I am so lonely and unhappy. I really don't know what to do. I want to go to sleep, and I cannot. It's quite absurd. You merely have to go to bed and blow out the candle. It is sometimes very difficult to keep awake, especially at church. But there is no difficulty at all about sleeping. Why, even babies know how to do that, and they're not even very clever. I have not slept for 300 years, he said sadly, and Virginia's blue eyes opened in wonder. For 300 years I have not slept, and I am so tired. Virginia grew quite grave, and her lips trembled like rose leaves. She came towards him, kneeling down at his side, and looked up to his old withered face. Poor ghost, she murmured. Have you no place where you can sleep? Far beyond the pine woods, he answered, in a low, dreamy voice. There is a little garden where the grass grows long and deep. There are the great white stars of the hemlock flower. There the nightingale sings all night long. All night long he sings, and the cold crystal moon looks down, and the yew tree spreads its giant arms over the sleepers. Virginia's eyes grew dim with tears, and she hid her face in her hands. Jeez. You mean the Garden of Death? She whispered. Yes, the Garden of Death. Death must be so beautiful, to lie in the soft brown earth, with the grasses weaving above one's head, and listen to silence, to have no yesterday and no tomorrow, to forget time, to forgive life, to be at peace. You can help me. You can open for me the portals of Death's house, for love is always with you, and love is stronger than death is. Virginia trembled. A cold shudder ran through her, and for a few moments there was silence. She felt as if she was in a terrible dream. Then the ghost spoke again, and his voice sounded like the sighing of the wind. Have you ever heard of the old prophecy on the library window? Oh, often! The girl cried, looking up. I know it quite well. It is painted in curious black records. They're letters, and it's difficult to read. There are only 6 lines. When a golden girl can bring prayer from the lips of sin, when the barren almond bears, and the little child gives away its tears, then shall the house be at peace. Be still and come together. But I don't know what they mean. They mean, he said sadly, that you must weep for my sins, because I have no tears, and pray with me for my soul, because I have no faith. And then, if you have always been sweet and good and gentle, the angel of death will have mercy on me. You will see fearful shapes in darkness, and wicked voices will whisper in your ear, but they will not harm you, for against the purity of a little child, powers hell cannot prevail. Virginia made no answer, and the ghost wrung his hands in wild despair as he looked down at her bowed golden head. Suddenly, she stood up, very pale, and with a strange light in her eyes. I am not afraid, she said firmly, and I will ask the angel to have mercy on you. He rose from his seat with a faint cry of joy, and taking her hand, bent it over the old-fashioned grace and kissed it. His fingers were as cold as ice, and his lips burned like fire, but Virginia did not falter as he led her across the dusky room. On the faded green tapestry were broidered little huntsmen. They blew their tasseled horns, and with their tiny hands waved her to go back. Go back, little Virginia, they cried. Go back. But the ghost clutched her hand more tightly, and she shut her eyes against them. Horrible animals with lizard tails and goggle eyes blinked at her from the cavern chimney piece and murmured, "Beware, little Virginia, beware! We may never see you again." But the ghost glided on more swiftly, and Virginia did not listen. When they reached the end of the room, he stopped and muttered some words she could not understand. She opened her eyes and saw the wall slowly fading away like a mist, and the great black cavern in front of her. A bitter cold wind swept around them, and she felt something pulling at her dress. "Quick, quick!" cried the ghost, "or it will be too late!" And in a moment, the wainscotings had closed behind them, and the tapestry chamber was empty. That's the end of that chapter. I am very quickly... Oopsie! I am very quickly gonna go to the toilet. I'm gonna run. You, if you wanna have some theories, have your thoughts out for how things are going at the moment with the story. It is getting kind of interesting, definitely. I'll be back in just a moment. Oh jeez, sorry. Oh. Wow, that's me. I'll be right back, okay? You theorize while I'm gone. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Aha! I'm back. Okay, give me 1 second. Whoops, I bumped something. Whoa. Whoa, okay, I can hear again. Ooh. Let me get the story back up. We left off. And now we're on chapter 6, I believe. Yeah, we're on number 6. 14 pages in, we're almost done. About 10 minutes later, the bell rang for tea, and as Virginia did not come down, Mrs. Audis sent up one of the footmen to tell her. After a little time he returned and said that he could not find Miss Virginia anywhere, as she was in the habit of going out to the garden every evening to get flowers for the dinner table. Mrs. Audis was not at all alarmed at first, but when 6 o'clock struck and Virginia did not appear, she became really agitated and sent the boys out to look for her, while she herself and Mr. Audis searched every room in the house. At 6:30, the boys came back and said that they could find no trace of their sister anywhere. They were now in the greatest state of excitement and did not know what to do, when Mr. Otis suddenly remembered that some days before he had given a band of gypsies permission to camp in the park. He, accordingly, at once set off for Blackfall Hollow, where he knew where they were, accompanied by his eldest son and 2 of the farm servants. The Duke of Cheshire, who was so perfectly frantic with anxiety, begged hard to be allowed to go through, but Mr. Otis would not allow him. He was afraid there might be a scuffle on arriving at the spot. However, he found that the gypsies had gone, and it was evident that their departure had been rather sudden, as the fire was still burning and some plates were lying on the grass. Having sent off Washington and the 2 men to Sour District, he ran home and dispatched telegrams to all the police inspectors in the county, telling them to look out for a little girl who had been kidnapped by tramps or gypsies. He then ordered his horse to be brought round, and, after insisting on his wife and 3 boys sitting down to dinner, he rode off to Ascot Road with a groom. He had hardly, however, gone a couple of miles when he heard somebody galloping after him. Looking around, saw the little Duke coming up on his pony, and with his face very flushed and no hat. "I'm awfully sorry, Mrs. Otis," gasped out the boy, "but I can't eat any dinner as long as Virginia is lost. Please, don't be angry with me. If you had let us be engaged last year, it would have never been all this trouble. You won't send me back, will you? I can't go. I won't go." The minister could not help smiling at the young, handsome scapegrace, such a good deal touched at his devotion to Virginia. So leaning down from his horse, he patted him kindly on the shoulders and said, "Well, Cecile, if you won't go back, I suppose you must come with me. But I must get you a hat at Ascot." "Oh, bother my hat! I want Virginia!" cried the little Duke, laughing, and they galloped on their way towards the rail station. There, Mr. Otis inquired of the station master if anyone answering the description of Virginia had been seen on the platform, but could get no news of her. The station master, however, wired up and down the line, and assured him that a strict watch would be kept for her, and, after having bought a hat for the little Duke from Linen Draper, who was just putting up his shutters, Mr. Otis rode off to Belksy, a village about 4 miles away, which he was told to be well known which he was told was a well-known haunt of the gypsies, as there was a large common next to it. They roused up the rural policeman, but could get no information on him, and after riding over the common, they turned their horses' heads homewards and reached the chase at about 11 o'clock. Dead tired and almost heartbroken, they found Washington and the twins waiting for them at the gatehouse with lanterns. As the avenue was very dark, not the slightest trace of Virginia had been discovered. The gypsies had been caught on by Brockley Meadows, but she was not with them, and they had explained their sudden departure by saying that they had mistaken the date of Courser Fair and had gone off in a hurry for fear that they might be late. Indeed, they had been quite distressed at hearing of Virginia's disappearance, as we are very grateful to Mr. Otis for having allowed them to camp in his park, and 4 of their number had stayed behind to help the search. car pond had been dragged, and the whole chase throughout had gone over, but without any result. It was evident that for that night, at any rate, Virginia was lost to them, and it was in a state for the deepest depression that Mr. Otis and the boys walked up to the house, the groom following behind with the 2 horses and the pony. In the hall, they found a group of frightened servants, and lying on a sofa in the library was poor Mrs. Otis, almost out of her mind with terror and anxiety, having her forehead battered with the eau de Cologne by the old housekeeper. Mrs. Otis insisted on her having something to eat, and ordered up a supper for the whole party. It was a melancholy deal, as hardly had ever one spoke, and even the twins were awestruck and subdued, as they were very fond of their sister. When they had finished, Mr. Otis, in spite of his intricacies of the little Duke, ordered them all to bed, saying that nothing more could be done that night, and that he would telegraph in the morning Scotland Yard for some detectives to be sent down immediately. Ooh. One small drink. Whoop. I am going everywhere, Jesus. Just as they were passing out of the dining room, midnight began to boom the clock tower, and when the last stroke sounded, they heard a crash and a sudden shrill cry. A dreadful peal of thunder shook the house. A strain of unearthly music floated through the air, and a panel at the top staircase flew back with a loud noise. And out on the landing, looking a very white and pale, with a little casket in her hand, stepped Virginia. In a moment, they had all rushed up to her. Mrs. Otis clasped her passionately in her arms. The Duke smothered her with violent kisses. The twins executed a wild war dance around the group. "Good heavens, child, where have you been?" said Mr. Otis, rather angrily, thinking that she had been playing some foolish trick on them. "Cecile and I have been riding all over the country looking for you, and your mother has been frightened to death. You must never play any of these practical jokes anymore." "Except on the ghost, except on the ghost," shrieked the twins as they campered about. "My own darling, thank God you are found. You must never leave my side again," murmured Mrs. Otis, as she kissed the trembling child and smoothed the tangled gold of her hair. "Papa," Virginia said quietly, "I've been with the ghost. He is dead, and you must come to see him. He had been very wicked, but he was really sorry for all that he had done. And he gave me this box of beautiful jewels before he died." The whole family gazed at her in mute amazement, but she was quite grave and serious, and turning round, she led them through the opening with the wainscoting down the narrow secret corridor, Washington following them with a lighted candle, which he had caught up on the table. Finally, they came to a great oak door, studded with rusty nails. When Virginia touched it, it swung open, and they found themselves in a little low room, with a vaulted ceiling and one tiny grated window. Embedded with the wall was a huge iron ring, and chained to it was a gaunt skeleton that was stretched out at full length across the stone floor. seemed to grasp with its long, fleshy fingers an old-fashioned trencher and an ewer that were placed just out of its reach. The jug had evidently been filled with water, and it was covered inside with the green mold. There was nothing on the trenches but a pile of dust. Virginia knelt beside the skeleton, and folding her little hands together, began to pray silently, while the rest of the party looked on in wonder that the terrible tragedy was now disclosed to them. "Hello!" suddenly exclaimed one of the twins, who had been looking out of the window. Oh god. Hold on. It feels like there is something crawling around in my ear and it is uncomfy. Oh Jesus. Ooh. That was really taking up my concentration, Jesus. Okay. "Hello!" suddenly exclaimed one of the twins, who had been looking out of the window to try and discover in what wing of the house the room was situated. "Hello! The old withered among thee blossomed. I can see the flowers quite plain in the moonlight." "God has forgiven him," Virginia said gravely, as she rose to her feet, and the beautiful light seemed to illuminate her face. "What an angel you are!" cried the young Duke, and he put his arms around her neck and kissed her. And that is the end of that chapter. Ooh, we're getting close. Ooh, jeez. Oh, whoopsie. Squeaky chair. It is kind of an old house here, so yeah, these chairs are extra squeaky. Oh god, stretching. Oh, it's been 85 years. Or how does the meme go? I don't know. Ugh. 84, it's been 84 years, okay. I am well behind on my meme knowledge. I'm not sure if the next one is the last chapter. Hold on. We're on page 16 on 19, so maybe this is the last chapter. Alright. Chapter 6, I believe it was. No, we just did it's chapter 7. They're written in Roman numerals, so I forgot. I forgot what those numbers meant. Alright. 4 days after these curious incidents at a funeral started from Canterville. Oh god, I'm gonna restart. I can feel my tongue twisting in ways it was not meant to be twisted. There's one thing about trying to speak English, but there's another thing about trying to speak it in an English accent. Whoa. At least the accent I have is not suited for this at all. Okay. Chapter 7. 4 days after these curious incidents, a funeral started from the Canterville Chase at about 11 o'clock at night. The hearse was drawn by 8 black horses, each of which carried on its head a great tuft of nodding ostrich plumes, and the leaden coffin was covered by a rich purple pall, which was embroidered gold in the Canterville coat of arms. By the side of the hearse, and the coaches walked. Oh god, oh. My page just unscrolled itself, oh no. Okay, here's where I left off, there we go. By the side of the hearse, and the coaches walked, the servants with light torches, and the whole procession was wonderfully impressive. Lord Canterville was the chief mourner, having to come up specifically from Wales to attend the funeral, and sat in the first carriage along with little Virginia, and then came the United States Minister and his wife, then Washington and the 3 boys, and in the last carriage was Mrs. Umney. It was generally felt that she had been frightened by the ghost for more than 50 years of her life. She had a right to see the last of him. A deep grave had been dug in the corner of the churchyard, just under the old Jew tree. And the service was read in the most impressive manner by the Rev. Auguste Dampier. When the ceremony was over, the servants, according to an old custom, observed the Canterville family, extinguished their torches, and as the coffin was being lowered into the grave, Virginia stepped forward and laid on it a large cross made out of pink and white almond blossoms. As she did so, the moon came out from behind a cloud and flooded it with its silent silver in the little churchyard. And from a distant corpse, a night yell began to oh god, oh no, oh god, I'm turning into an ooh-woo person, oh no. Return to child, Jesus, oh. And from a distant copse, a nightingale began to sing. She thought of the ghost description of the Garden of Death. Her eyes became dim with tears, and she hardly spoke a word during the drive home. The next morning, before Lord Canterville went up to town, Mr. Otis had an interview with him on the subject of the jewels that the ghost had given to Virginia. They were perfectly magnificent, especially a certain ruby necklace with an old veterinarian setting, which was a really superb specimen of 16th century work, and their value was so great that Mr. Otis felt considerable surprise about allowing his daughter to accept them. "My lord," he said, "I know that in this country mortmain is held to apply to trinkets as well to the land, and it is quite clear to me that these jewels are, or should be, heirlooms in your family. I must beg you, accordingly, to take them to London with you, and to regain them simply as a portion of your property, which has been restored to you under certain strange conditions. As for my daughter, she is merely a child, and has yet, I am glad to say, little interest in such... I don't know this word. Google sensei, save me. What does this mean? How do I say this word? Appurtenances. Jesus. I am glad to say that has little interest in such appurtenances of idle luxury. I am also informed by Mrs. Otis, who, I may say, is no mean authority upon art, having had the privilege of spending several winters in Boston when she was a girl, that these gems are worth great of great monetary worth, and if offered for sale, would fetch a tall price. Under these circumstances, Lord Canterville, I feel sure that you will recognize how impossible it would be for me to allow them to remain in the possession of any member of my family. And indeed, all such vain gauds and toys, however suitable or necessary to the dignity of the British I'm trying my best. Artistocracy. To the British artistocracy, right. Would be completely out of place among those who have been brought up on the severe and that believe immortal principles of the Republican simplicity. Perhaps I should mention that Virginia is very anxious that you should allow her to retain the box as a memento of your unfortunate but misguided ancestor, as it is extremely old and consequently a good deal out of repair. You might perhaps think to fit a comply with her request. For my own part, I confess I am a good deal surprised to find a child of mine expressing sympathy with the medievalism in any form, and only account for it by the fact that Virginia was born in one of your London suburbs short after Mrs. Otis had returned from her trip to Athens. Water. One bit of water. Lord Canterville listened very gravely. Oh my, oh gee, oh no, oh whoopsie, oh whoopsie. It's crawled again. There we go. Lord Canterville listened very gravely to the worthy of Minister's speech, pulling his grey moustache now and then to hide his involuntary smile, and when Mr. Otis had ended, he shook him cordially by the hand and said, "My dear sir, your charming little daughter rendered my unlucky ancestor, Sir Simon, a very important service, and I and my family are much indebted to her for her marvellous courage and pluck. The jewels are clearly hers, and begad, I believe that if I were heartless enough to take them from her, the wicked old fellow would be out of his grave in fortnight, leading me to the devil of life. As for their being heirlooms, nothing is an heirloom that is not so mentioned though in I want to be able to read this properly, damn it. Doing my best. As for their being heirlooms, nothing is as an heirloom that is not so mentioned in a will or a legal document, and the existence of these jewels has been quite unknown. I assure you, I have no more claim on them than your butler. And when Miss Virginia grows up, I dare say she will be pleased to have pretty things to wear. Besides, you forget, Mr. Otis, that you took the furniture and the ghost at a valuation, and anything that belonged to the ghost passed once into your possession, as whatever activities Sir Simon may have shown in the corridor at night, in point of the law, he was really dead, and you acquired his property by purchase. Oh. Mr. Otis was a good deal distressed at Lord Canterville's refusal, and begged him to reconsider his decision. Hold on. I thought I heard someone. I thought the Canterville ghost is after me. Alright. He's come back to haunt me, he's dead, and he's now onto my realm. Oh, Jesus. Mr. Otis was a good deal distressed at the Lord Canterville's refusal and begged him to reconsider his decision. The good-natured peer was quite firm and finally induced the minister to allow his daughter to retain the present the ghost had given to her, and when, in the spring of 1890, the young Duchess Cheshire was present at the Queen's first drawing-room on the occasion of marriage. Her jewels were the furniture of the I think my tongue is done for the day. Well, we're almost there. Her jewels were the universal theme of admiration, for Virginia had received the coronet, which is the reward of all good little American girls, and was married to her boy love as soon as she came of age. They were both so charming, and they loved each other so much that everyone was delighted at the match, except the Marchioness of Dumbleton, who had tried to get the Duke for one of her I'm gonna drink water. Who had tried to catch the Duke for one of her 7 unmarried daughters, and had given no less than 3 expensive dinner parties for that purpose. And, strange to say, Mr. Otis himself. Mr. Otis was extremely fond of the young Duke personally, but theoretically he objected to titles, and, to use his own words, was not without apprehension lest, amid the enervating influences of a pleasure-loving architecture, the true principles of republican simplicity should be forgotten. His objections, however, were completely overruled, and I believe that when he walked to the Isle of St. George, I'm sorry for the mess-ups. And I believe that when he walked up the Isle of St. George's Handcover Square, with his daughter leaning on his arm, there was not a prouder man in the whole length of England. The Duke and Duchess, after the honeymoon was over, went down to Canterville Chase, and on the day of their arrival, they had walked over to the afternoon to the lonely churchyard by the pine woods. There had been a great deal of difficulty at the first about the inscription of Sir Simon's tombstone, but finally it had been decided to engrave on it simply the initials of the old gentleman's name and the verse from the library window. The Duchess had brought with her some lovely roses, which she strewed upon her grave. Upon the grave, not her grave, she's not dead yet. And after they stood by it for some time, they strolled into the ruined channel of the old abbey. There, the Duchess sat down on a fallen pillar, while her husband laid at her feet, smoking a cigarette and looking up at her beautiful eyes. Suddenly, he threw his cigarette away, took a hold of her hand, and said to her, "Virginia, a wife should have no secrets from her husband." "Dear Cecil, I have no secrets from you." Yes, you have," he answered, smiling. "You have never told me what had happened to you when you were locked up with the ghost." "I have never told anyone, Cecil," said Virginia gravely. "I know that, but you might tell me." "Please don't ask me, Cecil. I cannot tell you. Poor Sir Simon, I owe him a great deal. Yes, don't laugh. Cecil, I really do. He made me see what life is, and what death signifies, and why love is stronger than both. The Duke rose and kissed his wife lovingly. Oh. You can have your secret, as long as I have your heart, he murmured. You've always had that, Cecile. And you won't tell our children someday, won't you? Virginia blushed. That is a sweet ending to the whole story. Damn. Okay, I did not expect that to be wholesome. Ooh. Oh god, I'm having hiccups. I think that was a pretty cool story, really. It's not at all what I expected, to be completely honest. When I thought of Canterville Ghost, I thought it was gonna be more terrifying. Although, it is a book that has been written very long ago. So maybe, I don't know if horror was that prevalent at that time. Hold on, I'm gonna look something up because how old are the books? Are these books written again? Oscar Wilde. The Canterville Ghost. When was it released? Let me see. Originally published on March 2, 1887. That is a long while ago. Surprisingly also in March. We're a few days off. Actually, let me check. Oh, okay, no. I was thinking like, if I had read this story last week, if that was on the 2nd, that would have been really cool. It's coincidental timing, but no. Right. So. It was definitely a fun read to me, and I'm curious what you guys think of it. At least, if you've been able to understand the story so far. Maybe you fell asleep halfway or you had to go somewhere. Either way, if need be, you can go and check back. But certainly let me know, either in the comments or here, wherever it is, you know. Right, I do have something that I need to bring up still before I go. Before I forget. Hold on. Right. Okay. So something I do want to mention this stream, and I'll also make a community post about it, is that I'm not able to stream next week. Because this alien is going to an alien hospital. Don't worry, it's not for anything serious. But I just gotta go. However, I'm trying to see if I can make a video of some kind. Which kind of different than what I've been doing so far, but hopefully I can manage to pull it off and not cringe at myself. Okay, so I'm gonna tell a little bit about what it is. I wanna get a little bit more into acting, and I found a way to do that, actually. So hopefully, I'm really hoping that next week I might be able to release a video relating to me acting. What it is gonna be, I have a slight idea, but I'm mostly gonna try to improv it. I'll just see. I'll fuck around and find out. Oh, I think that's gonna be it for me today. And I'll see you guys not next week, but the week thereafter. Probably Monster Hunter. And I will probably be doing another one of these reading streams. Not very soon, because I have a few other things I'm working on. But I will certainly be coming back for them, because I do like doing these kinds of streams. It's more simple, and it honestly helps me speak a lot more, and also read a book. Because, let me tell you what, right? This is the first book that I have ever fully read. This is an achievement for me. Normally, I've never finished a book before. Or I just didn't want to read it because it wasn't in English. Alright. But I hope you guys had a fun day. Hope you've been comfy, maybe you've had this on in the background. Let me know what you think of the story. Let me know if... Actually, yeah, let me know if there's any story that is maybe public domain which I can read for you. Because I would love to do another one of these. Finding one in the public domain is kinda hard sometimes. Alright, that's it for me now. I hope you have a good day, have a good night, and bye bye. I'm not gonna play my ending screen because that's gonna be loud. Bye!